Good evening. So what a very special event. A conversation between William Dalrymple and Moin Mir that has been arranged by the International Music and Arts Society in collaboration with the Bangalore International Centre. My name is Indira Bruna Chandrasekhar, and may I welcome you on behalf of both organizations. I'm happy and proud to be associated with both the BIC as a member of its programming committee, apart from having been a loyal member of the audience for many years, and with the IMAS on whose advisory committee I sit. Since this is an IMAS event, I'll just take a moment to say a little bit about the organization. The IMAS was established in the mid-1970s by Rani Vijaya Devi at the suggestion of her brother, Sri Jai Chamarajwardiya, the Maharaja of Mysore. The Maharaja's recent centenary celebrations have served to remind the public of the deep love and commitment he had to music, both Western and Carnatic, and his patronage of the arts. The IMAS, inspired by that Wadiyar legacy, curates and presents music and art of the highest quality to a Bangalore, and now in COVID times, an extended audience. I have a particular connection with the society because my mother, Ila Chandrasekhar, was its founding vice president, along with Jeannie Kharas, and Rani Vijaya Devi, of course, was the president. My mother is now the president, and Urmila Devi, Rani Vijaya Devi's daughter, its active organizing secretary, and they, along with the committee, continue to carry the purpose of the society forward. I've had the privilege of being part of a group developing a volume commemorating the society. So if you'll indulge me from a second longer, I just wanted to say how impressive it is when looking from today's perspective, where we're widely connected, India is much better funded. We look back at the singular dedication of a group of people bringing to their city for the very first time artists such as M.F. Hussain, Malavika Sarukai, and for the only time, the great cellist, Smitislav Rostropovich, and so on and so forth. But our audience awaits our speakers of today, so you'll have to get the IMAS book in order to get a sense of this fascinating cultural trajectory of Bangalore. Welcome, William and Moin. The audience can read your bios on the website, but I would like to give some insight into why today's conversation is so very special. William Dalrymple's The Anarchy is a great endeavor, a delving into archives in multiple languages with a host of researchers and translators to uncover the story of the East India Company in India. In the book, he does brilliantly what he always does so well, act as the sutradhar, the storyteller, and paint a picture for the reader, unraveling different threads of the narrative, different sequences, different characters, and revealing the complex ramifications of the greed that drove the East India Company and the staggering lack of honor with which they often acted. William is a historian, and he has almost single-handedly raised the bar on writing that makes the history of the subcontinent accessible and exciting to the non-historian and the general reader. As you can imagine, William, you have a huge fan base here in Bangalore, 450 registrations for this event alone. And so we're hoping you'll be able to come back and be here in person when COVID allows us to do so. And why is the conversation between him and Moin so very interesting? Moin has written a very different book, a book about his family, the Nawabs of Surat. It is a much more personal one about the wicked duplicity of the company in annexing the port of Surat and then reneging on their treaty with the Nawabs. But what makes the story so profoundly fascinating, and I hope I'm not revealing too much, Moin, is that Moin's ancestor then fought this injustice in the courts in England, confronting the British by exploiting their very own systems of justice. Did he succeed? Well, William and Moin, I shall let you take it from here. Thank you very much for being part of this.
Thank you very much, Indira. I'm very sorry not to be in Bangalore. This is just the time of year when it's lovely to leave Delhi and accept any invitation you can imagine to go and sit in the warmth of the Bangalore sun and enjoy it. Sadly, I'm in the even colder climes at the moment of of the Alps. I'm on the edge of Lake Como with snow billowing in this afternoon, apparently. So my unheated library here is we've just put the radiators on for the first time. But it's still quite chilly, as you can see from my shawl. Anyway, to get to business, the Anarchy makes a point which, in a sense, is a very obvious point, but one which I think has been forgotten in the last century. That the East India Company was, as its name suggests, a company, a corporation. It was not the British government. The Victorians slightly covered this over and used to talk about the acts of the East India Company as great national triumphs. Macaulay and the Victorian historians underplayed and deliberately covered up the fact that the East India Company was not a national operation operating with high ideals from a national government, but was very much a corporate affair run by a bunch of businessmen for their own enrichment. Now, nothing wrong with that in itself, as long as you're not doing what the company went on to do, which is to loot, plunder, asset, strip, and turn yourself into an empire within an empire. And what Moin and I are going to do over the next hour is we're going to pass the ball back and forward. So I'll open with the early history of the company. We'll then have a look at Mughal Surat with Moin. I will then tell the story of the apogee of the company, and then Moin will end the session with the extraordinary story of his forebears' battle against the company and his unlikely and unique victory. So the company was formed in 1599, which is the same year and in the same city that Shakespeare was writing Hamlet. So you can imagine yourself sitting in Shakespeare's house just downriver of the Globe Theatre, where the Globe still is, of course, today, and walk across London Bridge and wander on for about 20 minutes, and you get to Moorgate Fields, which is not, as it is these days, a grotty tube station, but then was, as its name suggests, a rural spot on the edge of London where people pastured their cows and fed their sheep with the pasture. And in the middle of these Moorgate Fields was the hall, the Founders' Hall, where a man called Sir Thomas Smythe in September 1599 called for a meeting of potential investors of what he called the London Company of Merchants trading with the East Indies. And initially it was aimed at the East Indies, not India. The first voyage of the company was aimed at the island of Run, which is off the coast of Indonesia, small island of no great significance today, but in the 16th century of enormous importance as the world's only source of nutmeg. And these spices, which today we take for granted, the pepper in our pepper grinders on any table anywhere in the world, such an unremarkable condiment that we don't barely look at it when we sit down at dinner. These were high luxury items in the West in the 17th century. And Smythe, who had called this meeting, had already made a fortune importing pepper and other spices, but did it with a vehicle called the Levant Company, which, as its name suggests, traded not with India, but with the Levant, with Venice, Aleppo, and Cairo. And he'd made a small fortune from this, buying spices basically from Arab merchants who'd bought it from Indian merchants who'd bought it from Indonesian merchants. At each stage, there was a markup. And all this world was shattered when the Dutch, who had just shaken off the lordship of the Spanish and formed their own nation and invented very ingenious new methods of banking and so on. When they realized you could just sail around the Cape of Good Hope, go straight to Indonesia yourself, buy the product directly from the producers and sell it much fresher and much cheaper without any middlemen in Europe, making a fortune. And the Dutch had done this very successfully in 1598. So in 1599, Smythe says, well, if they can do it, we can too. And off they sailed. And his crew are almost entirely ex-Caribbean pirates. This is the great age of the real life Johnny Depps and all those Pirates of the Caribbean stories. But this was when Elizabethan England was making money raiding Portuguese and Spanish treasure ships, which were passing the gold and silver of the Aztecs and Incas and other Native American peoples, was being moved in great quantity to Spain and Portugal at this period. And English sailors such as Drake and Raleigh used to raid these ships at great profit and bring some of it back to Britain. So Smythe recruits a crew of some of these guys, they sail off, and just as they're reaching Indonesia, they see a Portuguese ship, exactly the sort that they're all used to raiding. So what do? They just board it, and they take all the pepper from the hold of the Portuguese ship, shove it in their own hold, and sail back home again, where they sell the pepper for £1 million, which in Elizabethan times is a vast quantity of money. And the company gets off to a good start, it makes lots of money, but it never really manages to get dominance over the Dutch, because the Dutch have got the much better banking systems, better ships, more money to operate with. And by the 1640s, the company basically gives up. They have a battle with the Dutch, which they lose, and there's a swap. The British get a small muddy island in the Hudson River called Manhattan, which obviously turns out to be a rather good deal in the long term, but was not considered so at the time, while the Dutch are basically handed over complete dominance of the spice trade. And the East India Company, like a failed startup that it was, has to think again, scratch its head. How is it going to make money? And what it does instead is that it decides to trade in textiles. And the world's best source of textiles in this period was the Mughal Empire. Because 1640, of course, is exactly the period when the Shah Jahan is on the throne, the Taj Mahal is being built, and that great Mughal aesthetic, which produced such beautiful miniatures and buildings, also had a input into the textile trade. And suddenly, India is producing vast quantities of textiles, beautiful hangings, beautiful embroideries, fabulous silks, but also really good quality, simple cotton, produced at a quality and with the quantity that no one else can manage, and at a price no one else can manage. So the Brits come into the picture as a corporation trading in textiles, largely in the longer run with Bengal, but the initial point of contact where the first company ship docks is none other than Moin's ancestral city of Surat. So over to you, Moin, for the next.
Thank you. Thank you, Willie. That's such an incredible, start and pace to the talk. Yes, and as Willie said that the East India Company began its enterprise, if you wish, in India, and a lot of people know that it began its enterprise in India as a trading outfit, and they landed in Surat. With Sir Thomas Roe petitioning Jahangir to be allowed to trade from the port of Surat. Now, it's important to understand, what Surat was back then. And we had a city which is absolutely bursting with cosmopolitan energy. A vast number of traders are there. You've got the Baghdadi Turks, the Baghdadi Jews, the Chalabi Turks, the local Jains, Hindus, Muslims, the Khojas, the Boras, the Portuguese, as Willie spoke about. All of them enmeshed together in this incredible city that even Leo Tolstoy writes about and expresses a desire to visit, because some of the businessmen or the traders have gone and spoken to him about Surat being this fabulous city on the banks of the river Tapti, and Leo Tolstoy expresses his wish to visit Surat. It never really came to fruition, but that's the nature of Surat at that point in time. It found itself at the confluence point, because it is at the mouth of the Tapti and it is opening up into the Arabian Sea. And once you open up into the Arabian Sea, then all the various trade routes start coming into play. The Ottomans are there, as we mentioned, the Dutch and the Portuguese are there, and all of them get sanads or basically license to trade in Surat. The East India Company sets up its factory and starts refining cotton and also sending it off to the Far East, Malacca. They were trading also in bullion. Now, by the time it is 612, just taking a little step back, Catherine of Braganza has married Charles II of Britain. And she brings with her, a few little islands in dowry. And those islands are 150 miles south of Surat. Those islands, are considered by Charles to be, too small a picking for him. And he passes them off onto the East India Company. Those islands are Bombay. What happens over a period of time
rather than
is
they said it at the time, Bombay, B-U-M-B-Y-E.
That's right.
The Brits don't have a clue where this is. And I think it's somewhere off the coast of Brazil initially. But anyway,
exactly.
Sorry.
No. So it's so strategically located, and the East India Company is constantly pushing at controlling that peninsular strip of 150 miles north and south of Surat, because it literally is the heartbeat of sorts for maritime trade in India, and Surat has become the symbol of maritime might of India. Nevertheless, as time passes, I think it's 1688, I'm just referring to my book, that the East India Company moves its headquarters in trading from Surat to Bombay, but still managing to keep a large number of ships, particularly warships that were docking on the banks of the Tapti. Now, with the I'm just basically taking this story a little forward, fast forwarding a bit. Let's cut to 1707, when Aurangzeb, who is the last of the mighty Mughals, dies, and with his death, India plunges into absolute anarchy. Willie's book, because every prince raises a banner of revolt. He wants his independence. The Mughal Empire is weak; it's collapsing. And by the time it's 1733, one man called Tegh Khan, who is a general in the Mughal army, but is witnessing this anarchy unfolding, makes his way down south from Delhi towards Surat. And he finds that Surat itself is in the grip of anarchy. There is no real power vacuum. I mean, there is a power vacuum there, because the governors, the constant changing of governors in Surat is leaving a massive power vacuum. The merchants, who are incredibly wealthy, and this eclectic mix of Armenians and Turks and Portuguese and Jains and Hindus are all calling for a stable administration in Surat. So Tegh Khan, with about 3,000 odd soldiers, parks himself outside Surat and then makes his move and takes over Surat. Now, Surat by 1733 is still very much a thriving port, although Bombay is being built slowly and steadily by the English. And he establishes in 1733 the first Nawabship of Surat, an independent Nawabship, which is independent of the imperial court in Delhi. Tegh Khan is a fierce kind of a character, and he identifies the East India Companies as foreigners and who are a genuine threat to Surat and the western coast. And he does all kinds of things. He raises taxes of the East India Company in Surat on all the goods that they are taking out of India. The East India Company refused to pay the tax. They put a blockade in Surat. Tegh Khan goes after them. There's a reasonable skirmish of sorts off the coast of Surat. And this is the first time an independent Nawab of Surat engages in open warfare with the East India Company. But he doesn't have the might of the East India Company Navy, and he faces he takes some massive casualties. Anyways, a truce is struck, and Teba Khan strikes a deal with Damaji Gaikwad of Baroda to ensure that the East India Company does not really have any power in Surat in terms of administration. And as long as that, that kind of understanding between Damaji Gaikwad and Teba Khan would hold, the East India Company would be kept at bay. And so that's felt. Racing forward, let's go quickly towards 1799. By the time it's 1799, there have been a few successions to Teba Khan.
Moin, should I break in there and do a quick run through the mid-18th century and then hand back to you in 1799?
Sure. Go for it.
So Moin has left us with the Mughal Empire breaking up. Aurangzeb has died, the anarchy has broken out. And the crucial, everyone's wondering what's going to happen to Delhi, because Delhi at the death of Aurangzeb is the richest and largest city in the world. There's 1 million people there. And for all the decadence of the Mughal Empire, for all the revolts by the Marathas, by the Jats in the Doab, and by the Sikhs in the Punjab, it is still an incredibly rich city. And everyone wonders, is it going to be the Marathas that are going to get their hands on all this? Is it going to be the Jats? Is it going to be the Sikhs? In the end, rather gallingly for all three, it's none of those. It's someone quite unexpected who leapfrogs in from Persia, namely Nadir Shah. Now, Nadir Shah is a peculiarly unpleasant warlord, a man of humble birth, son of a furrier who made hats, who turned out to be a military genius, rose up the Persian military system, eventually performed what we today would call a military coup, took over, got rid of the Safavids, took over Persia for himself. And then, in order to get money to fight his real enemies, who were the Turks and the Russians, he decides to raid India. He never wants to conquer India, has no intention of replacing the Mughals. He just wants the cash. And that's what he gets. He comes in with his new gizmo, which is something called the Swivel Gun, which you can see one in the National Museum in Delhi. It's an enormous big jezail, a thing that's halfway between a rifle and a cannon. But it can be cradled on a sort of tripod on a horse's neck, if you connect it up with this thing that Nadir Shah basically invents. And these are the equivalent of the first battle tanks, because they have armor-piercing bullets that can just blow right the way through a fully armored Mughal cavalryman, and probably the man in the rank behind him too. And the Mughals have got nothing. I don't know about this. They're very conservative in their warfare. And when Nadir Shah comes in and takes on just 160,000 of these guys with swivel guns, take on 1.5 million Mughals who are all crammed into a camp in Karnal, all fighting with each other, with all the kind of girls from Khan Market in their Dior sunglasses coming up to watch the fun. And it's a classic mix. It's a classic confrontation between a kind of amateur army full of sort of spibs and sunglasses, if you like, against the real professional hard men from Persia. And they make mincemeat of the Mughals. Nadir Shah invites Muhammad Shah Rangila, who's like the least warlike Mughal in history. He's got a cross-dressing character who likes listening to, a great musician, introduces the sitar from
quite enlightened.
Punjabi folk. What?
Muhammad Shah, quite enlightened. Let's give him a bit of that.
Oh, very enlightened, but definitely not a man you'd want to lead you into battle.
No,
Moin. I
definitely
think I agree with that. And Muhammad Shah goes with his musicians and dancing girls to dinner with Nadir Shah, and then he's arrested, and he's not allowed home. His bodyguard is disarmed, and he's taken prisoner. And Nadir Shah rides with Muhammad Shah into Delhi, where they proceed to loot the city. 6 weeks later, they leave with the Kohinoor, the Daryanur, and 8,000 wagons full of loot, including the famous Peacock Throne. And the whole lot is just shipped back to Herat on the Afghan-Persian border, where Nadir Shah basically fills the fort there with all the gold and jewels. Everything that's been looted by the Mughals from South and Central India is in turn looted by Nadir Shah and just taken up to Afghanistan. And it's like that is the moment the Mughal Empire ends, simply because there's no money left to pay the soldiers, there's no money left to pay the civil service, and you could as well take a large mirror and throw it out the window, watch it shatter. That's what happens to India. Jodhpur, Jaipur, Mysore, Hyderabad, the Marathas, the Gaikwads, all these different factions, the little Punjabi hill states, the great Rajas of Mysore, we should say, this August company, and all these others break off and start their own little states, and are fighting with. And so you move from a world which, for better or worse, was one enormous state with 4 million men under arms in an army, to a world of 300 or 400 states, all with tiny little armies. And the people who benefit from this are two East India companies. The French East India Company, the colonial based in Punjab, and the East India Company of Britain, now based in Calcutta. And these guys have been assisted by the fact there's been a revolution in Europe. Frederick the Great has revolutionized warmen, ballistic, mobile artillery that can be trotted around the battlefield at speed, infantry tactics with youths. And instantly the balance of power moves from the cavalry, which have dominated warfare for centuries, to the new infantry troops armed with these muskets. And the army have never seen this sort of warfare before. They haven't got any answer to it yet. They will do by the 1780s. They will, before the French and the English have the run of the subcontinent, can really defeat anyone that comes and picks a fight with them. And the first guy who does come to fight with them is Siraj-ud-Daulah, who takes Calcutta. For the East India Company fortifications without permission, and he goes in, he takes Calcutta, imprisons a few of the survivors in a small military prison. Later die them was enough die, and it's enough of an atrocity to be a casus belli. And the bad news for Siraj-ud-Daulah is that the day the news reaches Madras, so does a man called Robert Clive, who's come in with a new task force from Britain. And these are government troops, Marines, rather than East India Company troops, because Britain is about to go to war with France, and the company has persuaded the government uniquely to lend them some British government troops to fight against the French. But the French aren't there. There's been a mess of intelligence. The French fleet that the British thought was going to India was actually heading for Canada to fight in the wars that are fictionalized in The Last of the Mohicans. If you can think of Daniel Day-Lewis leaping over sort of waterfalls with pretty girls in pursuit in the Canadian-American border, that's where the action is at this point. And this fleet has arrived with nothing to do in Madras, so Clive says, right, we're going off to get Siraj-ud-Daulah, and that's what happens. They take back Calcutta. They then destroy the French headquarters at Chandanagar. And at that moment, just when they're about to head back to Madras, a letter arrives from Murshidabad. And the man that's written it is a man called the Jagat Seth. He is a Mawari banker, not just a Mawari banker, but kind of the Mawari banker. He's like the Rothschild of Mughal India. He's made a fortune shipping tax money around the country with a sort of hundi note system, and runs the mint in most of the Mughal Empire and is hugely rich. He put Siraj-ud-Daulah's grandfather on the throne in a previous palace coup, and now he writes to Clive saying, we've got to get rid of this guy Siraj. He's a pain in the ass, and he keeps making me make loans I don't want to do. I have an offer for you. I will pay you £2 million if you get rid of him, and I will pay the company £2 million for the loan of their troops. So Clive, without even thinking about it, just says yes, marches north, defeats Siraj-ud-Daulah, not through any great valor of his own, but because the opposition general, Mir Jafar, was also in the pay of the Mawaris. It's not it could never happen in India today that both sides were backed by Mawari bankers. It's unthinkable that such a thing would happen. The 1750s. And so it is that
William, are we losing you?
Yeah, I think we might be losing William.
I think we might be losing William. We'll wait for a minute or two. If he gets back on, and after Moin, maybe you can. Yes, I think we've lost William. So I suggest, Moin,
Yes.
maybe you can take up the story and then William can come back in. And oh, he's trying again. Let's see.
Yeah.
Can you see me now?
Yes.
Am I back?
Yes, you are back. Thank you.
So I'm nearly done. I've just got 5 more minutes and I'll hand back to Moin to finish the story.
Cool.
So at the Battle of Plassey, Clive helps himself to the Murshidabad treasury, and suddenly you find that the East India Company has moved from being a trading company, trading in textiles, to a territorial power. And 8 years later, at the Battle of Buxar, the company defeats not just the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam, but his main general, Siraj-ud-Daulah of Awadh, and the new Nawab of Bengal. And at the end of the Battle of Buxar, suddenly the company realizes that it controls the whole of North India. They hadn't particularly set out to do it, but they're very pleased to have it. They're particularly pleased to have all the assets. And being a company only interested in profit, they immediately asset strip the country. They rape, loot, and pillage. And where there had been 1 million incredibly profitable weavers working away in northern India, the company just basically strangles the goose that has laid the golden egg. And by 1770, when a famine breaks out, 5 million Bengalis die. And the company doesn't even bother setting up a soup kitchen. It doesn't think of itself as a government. It thinks of itself just as a profit-making vehicle for its shareholders. The company, shortly after that, in 1774, because of the famine, because there's no revenues coming in, goes bankrupt and has to go to the British government to be bailed out. And in 1774, you get this deal between the British government and the company, which for the first time brings the government into the picture. Up to now, it's been libertarian free capitalism in its most naked and greedy form. Now it is what I suppose today we would call a public-private partnership. And from this point, the government influence grows. And by the 1780s, the East India Company has twice as many troops as the British government. It has 200,000 sepoys at a time when the British Army only has 100,000 troops. It has now begun growing opium in Bihar, which it's selling in China. It's seizing Hong Kong shortly later, and it's become the biggest narco operator. Forget the Medellin cartel and forget all the stuff you've seen on Netflix. It's the East India Company that's the biggest drug dealer in history. So by the time that Lord Wellesley turns up in 1799, that's the elder brother of the future Duke of Wellington, a man who is about to see off first Tipu Sultan, then 3 different Maratha armies. The company has become a sort of world dominating commercial force. It's the first great multinational. It has profits greater than the GDPs of most countries. It can grow opium in one country, sell it in a second illegally, and ship the tea to not just India and Europe, but also to America. And it's East India Company tea that gets put into Boston Harbor at the Boston Tea Party. So you get this impression of this Elizabethan startup, which by 1799 has turned into a monster. Over to you, Moin.
Thank you, William. That was riveting. Thank you very much. So the year is 1799, and as Willie said, that's in many ways another turning point in the history of India, because the man who comes in as the Governor General is Richard Wellesley. Richard Wellesley has seen the exploits of Clive. he's realized very quickly that all of North India is now in the hands of the company, and the entire narrative of the East India Company has to change from being mere traders and businessmen to conquerors, rulers, and administrators. That massive change of narrative is championed by Richard Wellesley. As Willie mentioned, he goes and defeats Tipu, he defeats the Marathas in Asai, and then he turns his eyes on Surat. Now, just to take a little step back, the English East India Company was constantly trying to destroy Surat's trading prowess so that they could build Bombay as this giant port where they could harbor their ships, where they could harbor their warships, their trading vessels, all of that. So much so that in 1774, before Wellesley came in, the East India Company actually shuts down the mint in Surat. And the mint is where all the coinage was happening for circulation across Western India, the Mughal coinage. But when there's no mint and when there's no coinage, how does one trade in Surat? And so Surat's trade started plummeting and taking a massive nosedive, and Bombay started rising. Now, the helpless Nawab at that time, Hafizuddin, wrote to the English East India Company saying, you're ruining this city, you're ruining Western India, and at least start the mint so that my traders can operate on the Western coast. But of course, there was no reply from the East India Company officials and the board of directors in London. And Hafizuddin Khan has to just basically sit back and watch as Bombay grows and Surat starts decaying. The East India Company officials in the custom houses in Surat are utterly, utterly corrupt. No ship can actually leave the shores of Surat till they actually bribe the East India Company officials sitting in the custom offices, to get their ships out. In fact, one Bora merchant called Fakhruddin had to bribe close to 40,000 rupees just to get his ship outside into the Arabian Sea. And so the merchants were going bankrupt in Surat. Nevertheless, by the time it is 1799/1800, Richard Wellesley has come in, he's beaten Tipu, he's defeated the Marathas, he's turned his attention to Surat, and he sends in his troops. And he basically tells the Nawab that, sign a treaty of signing away your ruling powers, and we will give you a hefty pension of £150,000 a year. And also, 15,000 pounds a year. And we will also give you your private estates. Now, the private estates of the Nawab of Surat are close to a third of the city. And there is immense amount of employment in those estates. Weavers, textile makers, potters, all of that. But the administration of the city would have to pass on to the East India Company. At that time, the Nawab of Surat, who is Nasiruddin, considers a guerrilla rebellion against the East India Company. But his ministers prevail upon him and say, listen, look at what fate the Marathas have met. And you just can't match the might of Wellesley, his naval might and his military might, and you might as well just sign away your ruling powers, but keep jurisdiction over your private estates, which is a third of Surat. So this very tactful treaty is signed in 1800, and Surat is officially annexed by the English East India Company, and the Nawabship is confined only to the private estates, which are still, as I mentioned, very, very rich estates. Nasiruddin dies in 1821, and he's succeeded by his rather cherubic son, Afzaluddin Khan. Now, Afzaluddin Khan is quite a character. He loves his wine. He's an opium addict. He knows that he doesn't have the responsibilities of ruling Surat because the East India Company has taken it away, and so he's given to leisure and pleasure. But there is a lurking fear in Afzaluddin Khan because the estates are still very wealthy. They constitute close to 7 palaces, parks the size of Regent's Park here in London, and mango orchards, all of that, textile mills. And so he's worried that what would happen after him. And the reason he's worried is because he has just one surviving child, and that's a daughter. And the rumblings are there in the East India Company machinery of not accepting female succession. It's not yet official in terms of the doctrine of lapse, but the murmurings are there. And so a very warm-hearted and very affable and a very lovable Afzaluddin Khan is worried, and he starts looking out for a male successor. Back in those days, the East India Company did not, the East India Company, adoption was not necessarily allowed by the company. But Afzaluddin looks at 2 Mughal princes from Delhi, who he invites and whom his daughter, his daughter would choose, one of them. Both of them are opium addicts, and they're found in the opium dens of their supposedly to-be father-in-law. And Afzaluddin Khan sees the reflection of himself in these 2 Mughal princes and sends them back. He then turns his attention to Kathiawar. Now, Kathiawar is also known as Saurashtra, which basically means 100 states. Sau means 100, Rashtra means states, and it's dotted. The entire landscape of Kathiawar is dotted with tiny, tiny princes. Some of them have 20 villages, some have 50 villages, some of them just have 4 villages, but they're all, little independent princes. And he identifies one tiny state there called Kamadya, because the Darbar, or the ruler of that state, has made a name for himself. He's fought these dacoits that have been descending down from Balochistan into Kathiawar and wreaking havoc there. And so this prince called Jafar Ali Khan aligns himself with the Gaikwad of Baroda and wages war against these infested dacoits. And so he's created his name for himself. He's a 17-year-old man, young prince. And Afzaluddin sends a proposal for adopting Jafar Ali Khan as his son. It's accepted. Jafar Ali Khan is legally adopted by Afzaluddin as his adopted son and official heir. But there's still a sense of uneasiness in Afzaluddin, the Nawab of Surat. And he says, look, he fears the worst. So he gets his son married to his adopted son married to his daughter. And the strategy behind that is very clear. If the East India Company doesn't accept the adopted son as the heir to the estates, they would have to accept the daughter. So he thinks that he's covered all ground. Anyways, Nawab Afzaluddin dies in 1842, supposedly of an overdose of liquor and opium, all mixed together. And unfortunately, he dies quite a painful death in 1842. Now, the minute he dies, the East India Company tear up that treaty that they had signed with the Nawab in 1800. They refuse to accept Jafar Ali Khan as the next Nawab and the heir. And they even refuse to accept the daughter, who's also Jafar Ali Khan's wife. And basically, they storm into the estates. They shut down every textile mill. They usurp the estates. They forcibly take the royal family and confine them in servant quarters. It's a nightmarish situation for the Nawab family of Surat. By this time, the East India Company have built up a reputation of corruption. And they put up those estates that they have usurped illegally for public auction, which basically means they would be taking kickbacks from the auction and filling their own coffers and leaving the heirs of the Nawab of Surat, leaving them to the brink of destitution. As luck would have it, Jafar Ali Khan, from his marriage with the princess of Surat, once again has no male heir. He just has 2 daughters. And this leads the East India Company to even turn their attention to his tiny principality of Kamadya in Kathiawar. And a notice is sent that because you don't have a son, Kamadya too is going to be annexed. So you can imagine the plight of this young prince. He's lost Surat, and now there's a threat of losing this tiny principality of Kamadya in Kathiawar. He has only 2 daughters, and worse of all, his wife is now suffering from galloping tuberculosis. So he's left with no choice but to take on the East India Company. And he does something quite unique. In 1844, he voyages to England, backed by some funds that he gets by mortgaging a few of his lands in Kamadya before the East India Company can take it over. And he lands up in England in 1844. And the minute he lands in Victorian England, there's an enormous amount of press coverage about him. He's in his early 20s. He's dressed in these incredible Indian robes, turban, jewels, etc. And he tries to get traction by meeting influential lawmakers in Britain, members of parliament, as well as lawyers. And the initial euphoria around this Indian prince is such that he's invited to operas and he's invited to all kinds of balls and all of that, and he creates quite a stir. But the minute they realize that this is a bigger game that he's after, and he's looking at canvassing and lobbying support against the East India Company's judgment of public auctioning off the estates in Surat, which are now in such a dire circumstance that there is massive scale unemployment in a third of Surat. But the minute the movers and shakers in the political establishment of Britain realize that this is what his real cause is, they turn cold, and he doesn't get enough traction for 9 months that he's in Britain. He's created, he's a headline grabber in the newspapers, but nothing to show in terms of any meeting. Finally, he gets a meeting with the chairman of the East India Company, and he puts his case forward, detailing the stripping of the estates, the absolute, poverty-like conditions that his daughters are now living in, literally in servants' quarters. But he doesn't get anywhere even with the chairman, and he has to return back to India empty-handed. The minute he returns to India, the officials in the East India Company have been waiting for his return, and they very quickly pass a legislation in Bombay High Court, in the Bombay Court, saying that their decision on Surat estates is final, and there will be no further hearing of his case, which basically means he would not be able to get justice in India. So for 9 years, Jafar Ali Khan lives the life of a Sufi ascetic roaming in the forests of Kathiawar, meeting peers and spending time, understanding the philosophy of life and all of that. And he's basically, a wandering prince in the middle of the forest. After much soul searching, one creditor makes him an offer where he mortgages his village of Kamadya and the surrounding villages that were there completely to get cash to go back and fight the East India Company, go back to England. He, in the interim, his wife has died and his 2 daughters are with him. He leaves his daughters under the care of his mother, and he takes on the second voyage to Britain in 1853, this time determined to take the East India Company to the courts. It so happens that in a chance meeting at the Royal Ascot, which are the most famous, and it's a lodestar event in Britain's social calendar, Mir Jafar Ali Khan happens to be sitting in a box that is next to Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. At that time, Victoria is developing a real interest in India. She's not yet Empress of India, but she knows about the murmurings of the operations of the East India Company are reaching her ears. And Mir Jafar Ali Khan gets an opportunity to express his case and put his case forward to Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Now, Albert is utterly moved, and he introduces Jafar Ali Khan to his own personal Solicitor General, who decides to take on Jafar Ali Khan's case in the Houses of Parliament. And this is the first time that a bill would be tabled in the Houses of Parliament in Britain to for the reinstatement of the rights of an Indian prince. It had never happened before. There were attempts that were made by Indian princes to go, and as Willie points out, I think in his book, that Shah Alam also sent a dignitary to Britain. But in this case, it's the first time that the Solicitor General of Victoria, along with two brilliant lawyers, Fitzroy Kelly and Erskine Perry, who are also at the bar, take up Jafar Ali Khan's case in the House of Commons. And it's a great sight. I mean, when you think of it, picture this. It's 1854, an Indian prince dressed in these incredible robes with his three fantastic lawyers enters the House of Commons to table a bill called the Nawab of Surat Treaty Bill, which is going to be bitterly fought in the House of Commons before it even gets to be heard. And the reason is because the House of Commons is an utterly divided house. And it reflects how Britain stood at that time. The House, the East India Company is so powerful that its stakeholders are MPs, are members of parliament sitting in the House of Commons, and they choose to fight this bill. Nevertheless, to cut the long story short, there are four nerve-wracking sessions where the Speaker of the House prevents the bill from being read. And it is only on the fourth occasion when Sir Richard Bethell, who's the Solicitor General of the Queen, threatens the East India Company members of Parliament with direct Crown intervention. And I don't know how that could have happened, but nevertheless, that's what he threatens in the House of Commons. And it's a passionate, heated debate where Sir Richard Bethell appeals to the goodness of Britain, and he appeals to the justice of Britain on behalf of the wronged Indian prince, that the bill actually gets a hearing. And after immense lobbying, when the results are read and the bill is taken to vote, it's an astonishing feat. Out of 240 odd MPs, 218 vote in favor of Jafar Ali Khan and the Nawab of Surat Treaty Bill, and the balance vote against. So it's an overwhelming victory for the Indian in the Houses of Commons. I've done a fair bit of research, and I've not been able to find a single instance where an Indian prince is able to take this matter so deep into the Houses of Parliament, where he could get a bill tabled and passed at the height of empire. Now, when the bill is passed, after heated debate, two things happen. The estates are handed over back to Jafar Ali Khan. It's the first victory of sorts, and the pension is restored. At that time, it's vital to understand that the East India Company is on its knees, because India has now burst into open rebellion in 1857. The first war of independence is at its peak, and at that point in time, a victory for Jafar Ali Khan in the Houses of Parliament is hailed by the Queen of Awadh, who was visiting there and who seeks his advice because her son Wajid Ali Shah has been dethroned, and they all try. Even the princes of Sindh, which had the port of Karachi, which was annexed by the East India Company, they all rally around Jafar Ali Khan because he becomes, oddly enough, the voice of resistance of the East against the East India Company in Britain. During that time, he does fall in love with an English actress. And what happens to that love story is something I will not reveal. I would much rather you buy the book and read it. But over to you, Willie.
No, I think that's the end. That's a fantastic ending. Just leaving it to everyone's imagination with this actress, I think is a very good way to stop. But I think we have some questions.
Excellent. Should we take some questions?
So if I may, since I have the power here, and we're talking all about power, I'm going to ask the first question. So it's so interesting to me, really, that that it was somehow very organic that the East India Company moved into playing the game of trade into the game of power. It seemed to have not been a strategic decision, but simply one of those things that came to pass. Would you like to tell us a little about that?
Willie?
Yes, and that's very much the case, that there was no master plan, and other similar companies, for example, the Levant Company, which was still carried on and was trading with the Ottoman Empire, never made that transition from trade to conquest, because the Ottoman Empire never broke up. And there was no opportunity or intro to allow the Levant Company to misbehave in the way the East India Company did. What happened to the East India Company was the exception. And what gave it the opportunity was the fragmentation of the Mughal Empire and the fact that the two companies, the French and the British Company, were both recognized by everyone in India as having this military capability that Indians didn't have at that particular moment of history.
Yes.
And so everyone wanted to buy them as a mercenary force. So, for example, in the 1740s, you get the French being bought by the Nizam of Hyderabad to fight his wars, and meanwhile the Nawab of the Carnatic and Arcot by the East India Company armies. And so you find the company before it turns into a sovereign force, but after it has already been a trading force, becoming basically a mercenary outfit. There's a kind of intermediary moment when its troops are being used and sold and bought as a mercenary outfit. And it was only the fact that Siraj-ud-Daulah attacked the company just a particular unlucky moment for him, when this British government force had arrived. And then the second bit of bad luck, that he'd fallen out with Jagat Seth, who had £1 million in his back pocket, or rather 4, to offer the company in Clive to dethrone Siraj-ud-Daulah. And so those two accidents gave the company their idea, but for which it's easy to imagine that, the Marathas may have taken over, Tipu could have taken over, but your family has, of course, the opposite story, doesn't it? Your family, in a sense, got back into the palace thanks to the company who dethroned Tipu.
Yes, not my family per se, but Urmila's family. Yes, yes, indeed, and that was still causes hackles to rise here. There are people who don't want you to even recognize Tipu or celebrate his many worthy characteristics, and it still causes a lot of passion, of course, tied in with current politics, which skews everything and makes it all quite irrational. So yeah,
I've written quite a lot about Tipu in the Anarchy, and in a sense both sides are right, because in peace he was a very imaginative and strategic thinker. He took on the company in a way that no one else did. He introduced silk farming. He was actually, in peacetime, extremely generous and liberal to his Hindu subjects. But it's also true that in war he was a monster.
Yes.
He was famous, even by the standards of the time, for unnecessary executions and torture, for mistreating prisoners, and for mass conversions of both Kogi Christians and Hindus if they fought against him and lost. So both visions of Tipu: he was the freedom fighter, he was the innovative ruler, he was a remarkable leader in peace. He was also a monster in war, and a bigot and a tyrant who did convert people to Islam. So, and somehow, in a sense, we all want history to be black and white. We want heroes and villains, and Tipu doesn't fit into that. He's both a hero and a villain, which is a complicated thing.
Yes, and an opportunist in some ways. He made use of what was happening then, what would serve him then. We have a question about the Bengal trade. Wasn't the Bengal trade, yes, so basically interested in the East India Company's connection to Calcutta and Bengal, and why did they even move to Calcutta is a question.
So they didn't initially start in Calcutta. They started in Surat, in Moin territory.
Yes.
Then Bombay and Madras. Calcutta was the last place they went to, but they went there because, contrary to the situation today, when of course we don't think of either West Bengal or Bangladesh as being particularly rich areas today. We think, I suppose, of Punjab and Maharashtra as the place where the money is, and Bangalore. But in 18th century India, it was Bengal that was rich. Why was it rich? Because of the textile trade. There were 1 million weavers, and again, when we think of the Mughals Bollywood has sort of conditioned us to think of sort of people lying on divans, dropping mangoes into the mouths of pretty girls and playing with pigeons. But the reason that they had all that money and could build the Taj and everything was that they were riding the crest of the moment in history when India exported more and had a larger share of world GDP than any other moment in history, or certainly since classical antiquity. And in the 1720s, I think, is the moment when, according to Angus Maddison's figures, India overtakes China as the world's leading manufacturer. It's only happened twice in history. But one of those moments is this point. So the company realizes this, and it makes its money not by making textiles, not by creating anything, but by shipping. So they buy the textiles in India and they ship it around the rest of the world. And that they make them.
Yes, the volume. And the cotton was really grown in India, of course, but was also traded into India. Isn't that correct?
So I don't know about traded into India, but certainly cotton had been an Indian export since antiquity. There are reports of cotton. I mean, there is cotton even in Indus Valley excavations, and it was an important part of the trade with Rome. So yes, it was a very important part of 18th century Indian trade. So the company exports so much Bengali cotton to Mexico that you get deindustrialization in Mexico in the 18th century, thanks to and I said it's not stuff they're making, it's just stuff they're buying in Bengal, they're sourcing, shoving onto their ships and shipping it around and selling it elsewhere.
Yes. I had a question for Moin, because there are some other questions, but I would like to steal the spot again. I was curious about all of this material that you looked at. Was it stored in Surat? Were you in England that you found their research material? How much of it is sort of a family history, how much of it is recorded, and then of course you have what happened in the House of Commons in England. So I was curious about how you did your research.
All three, Indira. A lot of the research, a lot of the academic research, which is about Surat as a city, was done at the Asiatic Library in Bombay, as well as in Surat when I visited the castle there, and a large number of documents luckily still survive in the family archives. So I was lucky to have access to a lot of the letters that were written to the East India Company and the response that the Nawab family got from the East India Company, because those letters are part of the family archives. An enormous amount of time was spent researching at the British Library here in London. Once again, a fabulous, fabulous amount of information. There's one letter at the British Library which really, captures the despair, and you can sense it in the voice. You can actually hear Hafizuddin, the Nawab of Surat, pleading the court of directors in Britain, in a letter where he says, "Why have you shut down the mint? You are ruining the city. You're ruining the merchants." So the British Library preserves the sins of the East India Company very well, and so I could get access to it. And then, of course,
35 miles of East India Company documents in the British Library, apparently.
Yeah.
If you stack it end to end, 35 miles.
Unbelievable! It's just astonishing. And then the incredible debate that took place in the House of Commons, which was so fiery and so passionate, where the members of Parliament are against the Indian prince, and there are a large number of overwhelming members of Parliament who are fighting on behalf of the Indian prince. That is available in the it's on the British Parliament website called Hansard, as well as an original minutes is an heirloom. So I'm very lucky to have that.
Oh, how nice! Yes, that is special. There are a couple of questions about the role of the Marwaris, and in supporting the East India Company and the exploitation of India. And yes, would you like to sort of address that as a clump? It's, what is the reaction?
Sure.
Yes.
So the company was a company. It did business. And it quickly realized, long before Plassey, that the people who shared many of its interests were the Marwaris who were in Bengal, particularly the Jagat-Seth family. And the Jagat-Seth were the bankers to the governors of Bengal, particularly Ali Verdi Khan, Siraj's grandfather. And they were enormously powerful then as now, and very rich. And they'd got into the habit of basically getting rid of Nawabs that they didn't like and setting up ones that they had done. And Siraj's own family had been, the previous coup organized by the Jagat-Seths 50 years earlier or 40 years earlier. And it's very easy, in a sense, to with the benefit of hindsight, to be judgmental about this. But you've got to remember that this was a period of anarchy. Everyone was looking after their own interests. Everyone was trying to work out what was best for their children and their families. And the Marwaris and the other Indian banking families consistently made the decision that their interests were best served by getting into business with the company. Simply because I think, the Marathas and the Mughals treated the bankers as sort of irritants, and they were not the same class. They were often not, in the case of the Mughals, they weren't the same religion. You find in 1857, in the last Mughal research I did, that when the Mughals wanted money in 1857, they just called in the bankers and hung them up by their heels until they paid up. While the company, while it might asset strip and loot, was a business that understood the importance of basically looking after its bankers, looking after its finances, and it repaid interest on time with full interest. And so it was a very easy decision to make if you were a banker. These one lot repaid their debts on time with interest, the other didn't. Who are you going to lend to? So in the end, what happened is that the company conquers India. This is the shocking story. There's so much in the Anarchy which is quite hard for a British reader to read, because the company is portrayed in its true lights as an asset-stripping, ruthless, greedy multinational. But the bit that that sticks in Indian crawls, quite understandably, is the fact that it conquers India with Indian finance using Indian troops. It's not white British troops who are fighting Plassey Plassey it is, but almost every other battle, Buckner onwards, is not British government troops. It's not white men, specially trained up coming in from Britain. It's guys from Awadh. It's Rajput from Telangana. It's the sepoys, and 200,000 sepoys sign up the East India Company. Why? Because they're paid double what they're paid by Tipu and the Marathas. And if you're an Avadi farmer and they're looking after your children, you make the decision again, to take double the salary and work for that lot rather than the Marathas and so on. So that is the basic tragic story. East India Company does not conquer India on British finance, and it does not conquer it with British soldiers. It conquers it with Marwari finance and other Hindu finance, and using Indian Rajput soldiers.
Fascinating. Yes, I suppose because in a local sense, you have no idea of the larger picture. You're not thinking in terms of nation or loyalty, or thinking in terms of survival, really. And so, yeah.
And nothing has changed in a sense. We all make these decisions on a daily basis, for the good of our children and the good of our grandchildren.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Well, there's one final question, which maybe I'll throw out to you, or there are quite a few. There's a lot about the diamond trade and so on, but maybe that'll get too complicated. But there's a sort of a moral question about the East India Company, the morality. Did nobody feel that it was morally wrong, the way the East India Company was behaving? And that's sort of an interesting question.
Moin, do you want to start answering that? I'll have a go too.
Yeah, I might have a crack at that first. I think there were a large number of English who saw through the company. There were a large number of English who were scathing of the way the East India Company was operating in India. And as Willie says, in hindsight, it's very easy to judge, or for that matter, to think that history is black or white, and it's not. You had it wasn't that the East India Company was immune to criticism. The fact that Jafar Ali Khan can go to Britain, I mean, it takes a lot to go and fight there, there's no doubt about that, but get justice when 218 members of parliament vote for an Indian and against the company, it bears testimony to the fact that there were people who were in powerful positions, who were openly criticizing the way the company was going about loot and plunder and breaking treaties and looting India. In fact, when Surat was annexed, one of Britain's greatest historians, I forget his first name, but his last name is Beveridge, writes about how the annexation of Surat is nothing short of arrogance, nothing short of belittling a nation's pride. So you have instances, large number of instances, where the East India Company is criticized. And I think, dare I say this, but I mean, I think it's definitely worth saying, you could, if you had the wherewithal, if you had the guts, if you had the ability to place your point of view and articulate it and debate it out, you could take the East India Company to court in the Houses of Parliament. And Jafar Ali Khan was not the only one who challenged them in Britain and got he won in the House of Commons and probably the only one to do that, but there were many Indian princes or Indians who got British support against the functionings of the company. Ready?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with everything Moin says. It's the company was very unpopular in Britain. It was regarded in much the same way as people used to look at the 1980s merchant bankers or the Wall Street rats of New York. People thought they were get rich quick, amoral, parvenus. They were also envious of them because they were so very rich. The East India Company guys who did come back with fortunes bought large country houses, set themselves up as old, living flashy lifestyles amid the genteel poverty of their old money neighbors. And people didn't like them. But why did, as far as the company was concerned, it was a company. It was there to make money. It didn't. The one thing that's quite nice about the company is it doesn't have the hypocrisy of the Victorian Raj, which was also about exploitation, but which pretended to be about civilization. The company never pretends that it's about anything except making money for its shareholders and making money for its officials. And many did not make money. Many died. Most died. Of 2/3 of East India Company officers who arrived age 16, because that was the age when you had to be recruited, never made it back. Higher number, 3/4 in the army, East India Company army, had massive casualties. But if you were one of the lucky ones, the third who lived, and you did make it to the top, the company provided an opportunity to enrich yourself if you were a Scots family that maybe had backed the wrong side of the Jacobite rebellion, or you were a younger son whose elder brother had got all the money. This was one of the only ways open to you to rebuild your family fortune. And that's why people went out to India with the company. They never pretended they went there for the betterment of Indians, for education, for civilization, for building railways, or any of the rest of the nonsense that people said in the 19th century. They were very clear. They were there to make their money and to come home with a fortune. And many of them did. And the company moved Britain from being a peripheral country on the edge of Europe, poorer than the Portuguese and Spanish and Italians and French, to being the richest country in Europe, and providing, in a sense, the seed finance, which then creates the what finally pushes Britain into the first place during the 19th century. The other source of money in the 18th century, of course, was the slave trade and the Caribbean plantations. So you had a choice, basically. If you were a younger son wanting to make some money, you could join the slave trade and go out to the Caribbean and run plantations, or you could go out to India and asset strip and loot India. And those were the two best options.
Yes. Well, from looting and morality and survival, back to romance, Urmila asks, and maybe this should be our final question, when did the diamond cutting trade start in Surat, and did it play a part in its wealth at the time of the East India Company? And so, and then, you know.
Yeah, well, diamond cutting does not really play a part in in Surat during the time of the East India Company. It actually starts much later. Surat becomes the textile capital of India first, which is towards the close of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s. But diamond cutting, and I actually finished my book off with that. On that note, diamond cutting actually kicks off, only towards the mid 1900s, and today close to 80% of the world's diamonds are cut and polished in Surat, which is absolutely astonishing, and it bears testimony to the fabric of that city. It bears testimony to who the Suratis actually are. They are businessmen, they are traders, they have been at the forefront of business and trade for centuries, way before the East India Company, way before the Mughals, way before the Sultans of Gujarat. It's in their DNA, and it's absolutely astonishing that from nowhere, literally from nowhere, diamond cutting and diamond polishing becomes the heartbeat of Surat's industry. Within a matter of just 70 odd years. It actually starts sometime, if I'm not mistaken, it picks up towards the 1950s. That's when it really starts, kicking in. And today, think about it, 80% of the world's diamonds are cut and polished in Surat.
Yes, I think the interesting thing is that the Mughals didn't like their diamonds cut at all. They liked them in the raw. They would occasionally smooth off a surface or so on, but most Mughal diamonds were left uncut or only with a very basic rose cut, as it's called, at that period. And the fashion for cut stones, diamond cutting, it's disputed, and there are many different claimants, but I think scholars tend to agree that it was either in Venice or Amsterdam that modern diamond cutting really gets going. And it's only in the 18th century, so when the Koh-i-Noor comes to England from Dulip Singh to the East India Company to Queen Victoria, it arrives basically uncut, and when it's put on in the Royal in the Great Exhibition, the British are very disappointed because they're used to their diamonds being shiny by then. And the Koh-i-Noor is not. The Koh-i-Noor is just a big lump of glass as far as British observers look at it. So famously, Albert then gets it cut against advice because it's a flawed diamond, and it's never a good idea to cut flawed diamonds, and it loses 56% of its weight in that cut. So what you see today in the Tower of London is a mere fragment of the enormous stone that was worn on Nadir Shah, Ahmed Shah's, Ranjit Singh's arms, and before that in the Peacock Throne.
Yes, extraordinary. Well, we'll just have to all start excavating and looking for those bits of the Koh-i-Noor wherever.
It's a very good question. What happened to the bits that got? Bizarrely, my wife has got a fragment in her family. It hasn't gone to, it's gone to her sister, sadly, but of the what's the big South African stone that is the biggest diamond in the world?
The Hope? No, the Hope.
No, I can't remember its name. Anyway, the one that is displayed beside the Koh-i-Noor, and rather disappointingly is sort of 10 times the size. One goes to see the famous Koh-i-Noor, and then there's this much bigger diamond sitting next to it that's the size of a rugby ball rather than the size of a goose egg. And my wife's family actually have a fragment of that because her grandfather was involved in the cutting in South Africa. So there were fragments of that stone which circulated. Where are the fragments of the Koh-i-Noor? There's a basis for a novel or an investigation.
Yes, absolutely. Wonderful. What a wonderful session. I think it's really been fabulous having both of you. And each time I listen to you, William, I learn so much. It's fascinating and I love listening to you.
Thank you, dear. Thank you.
And Moin, what a wonderful, wonderful presentation of such an extraordinary story. It's great having the two of you together. I think it really...
There's no one I enjoy doing an event with more than Moin. We become a double act over lockdown, and it's always fun. So thank you, Moin.
Thank you, Willie. Thank you, Indira.
Thank you both. Thank you on behalf of both the BIC and the International Music and Arts Society. So grateful to have you next time in person, I hope. Look forward to your next books, and everybody in the audience must certainly get themselves copies of the books. They're both fabulous.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.